Screentone Club. This is your bi-weekly manga discussion, episode 56, recording on the 5th of July 2020 for release on probably the 21st of July. We've gotten ahead of ourselves in schedule, which is quite nice because we now have a buffer. If you would like to support us, you can do so on Patreon. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/Screentone Club, or one word, where lovely people support us, including Mr. Rob Jessup, who gets a shout out at the start of every episode. And also people who support us at the $3 and up tier get to vote on what we cover in future episodes for bonuses. We have a bonus episode every month. We previously did two, but now that lockdown is ending and we're suddenly having to be adults again and go outside, well, if we're forced to, we're now back to one. But if you want to see us do more bonus episodes again, please consider joining up the Patreon, as every dollar gets us closer to our goals of fully supporting our stupid manga purchasing, quite frankly. But enough about that. My name is Elliot Page, and I should probably introduce my lovely co-host, the very patient Mr. Hanley. How you doing, Andy?
Yes, I'm doing very well. I resent the idea that I'm having to do adult things now as somebody who sells cartoons for a living. Like, I don't relate to that at all.
Fair. I mean, I had a moment this weekend where I have now become an adult, if you put scare quotes around it, as I've done some DIY. I've drilled some holes in my walls, some of which I regret already, so that's going to have to be fixed. I bought a DETOLF, one of those display cabinet things you buy from IKEA that you put Gunpla in. And I also bought one of those meter-long sharks from IKEA, the Blahaj or whatever. So I'm now truly an adult because I have disposable income with which to buy a giant cuddly shark.
I feel like some of those things maybe do not technically count as being an adult, but let's not get into the weeds on that.
Well, I'd like to see some fucking 5-year-old buy a shark. Hey, you know.
yeah. Come on, kids, build a Detolf. Show us that we're wrong.
Yeah, God, it's like, yeah, I'd like to find someone else to do my DIY for me because holy shit, It's been a successful disaster so far.
Yeah, the Detolf building exercise is one of those enjoyable things where you unbox it and it tells you, hey, you need 2 people to build this, and you just kind of take it as a challenge, not as some kind of advisory. Yeah,
God, this is a bit of a weird grab, but man, Naruto from the series Naruto would be probably good at Detolf or IKEA building because he could just clone himself. Like, well, until they start fighting amongst each other and then they all vanish because, yeah, man, I should reread Naruto. It's been a while. Anyway, that's my stupid tangent about IKEA in the ninja world. But enough about that. We have other series to talk about. We have a whole heap of returning champions this episode, which we're kind of eager to jump in on. I'm going to take the first run very quickly to basically say, holy cow, Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man in the past few chapters has gone from like very confusing and moderately objectionable and really intense to intensely intense and more intense besides, because now some of its grand plot elements are starting to roar into life and honestly be kind of scary. Like the scope and the sheer mania of that series is my catnip and is also frankly kind of scary of like, oh, this isn't going to end well for anyone, but I'm really excited to find out how badly it's going to go for everyone. So yeah, holy cow. Anyway, That's enough about Chainsaw Man from me because I could basically do that every episode of this podcast. But man alive.
Yeah, I do. Now I've caught up with a bunch of other stuff that we will get into shortly. Like that may well be next on my catch up list to get back to it because I am way behind with that now.
Oh man, if you have like the most recent arc to go in one jump, you're going to have a merry old time of like yelling at your tablet, going what? Because also as a complete non sequitur, the author of Chainsaw Man must hate translators and letterers, is all I can say of the most recent chapters, because holy cow. Oh, it reminds me of bloody Medica Box, where it had
I was going to say, is this from the Nisio Isin school of hating translators and letterers?
Not quite as much, but of the same kind of feeling, because man alive. Oh man, why haven't we had Medica Box licensed? Probably because it's too crazy. Anyway, whatever. Andy, you've put on here that you finished The Promised Neverland, and I want to hear what you think about it. Please tell me.
Yes. I've had people kind of prodding me from all sides, kind of saying like, "Have you finished this yet? Because I need to talk about it."
You heard from my sock puppet accounts.
Yeah, and so yeah, like as you can probably guess, as we go through all these returning champions, I had a week off work, so I did a bunch of manga reading catch up, and yeah, Promised Neverland was kind of top of the bill as that had finished, and yeah, so I got to the end of it. And I loved it, to be honest. Like, I really, really liked how that series ended things. I think I was probably quite well served by having kind of left it for a fair few months. And, you know, there's a point where I didn't really fall off of it completely, but, you know, I think we talked about it previously, that it was maybe not in its strongest material.
Yeah.
And I kind of, and it was also clearly like ramping up to its ending. You know, everything was slowly falling into place as to what the kind of the final mission, quote unquote, would be. And so I kind of reached the point where it's like, you know what, I'm just going to leave this to run its course, and then I'll probably burn through it. And I think that actually served me in good stead, because that actually turned into a really good kind of rip-roaring tale as it kind of ramps up for its big finale. And yeah, I think it does a really great job. Like, it's the smartest thing that it does is it almost goes back to brass tacks on it, because it pulls everything back to, you know, that much more of that sort of initial kind of cat and mouse feeling, where, you know, there is grand kind of world stuff at stake, but it feels more intensely personal. And I mean, it very literally kind of goes back to basics towards the end. You know, it kind of reintroduces some things from the very start of the series, but in a way that doesn't feel like it's too kind of hokey. It works, it makes sense, it pulls it all together really nicely. There's a great chapter or two where the authors basically put down their pens, turn to the author and say, let's talk about capitalism, which I also really liked. You know, the series, for a series that's kind of, it's clearly always had like politics in it, but it's always kept it sort of on the back burner. I kind of liked how it was just very blatant and overt in saying like, hey, this is what we're actually saying here. You know, in a world and a time where people can somehow like watch the Star Wars movies and say there's no politics in this, it's kind of nice to see some authors actually just come out and just like hammer it home and be like, look, this is kind of the broad strokes of what we're saying about this world, and you may want to take some of this into account in the world that you live in. So all of that stuff was really strong. And yeah, like it kind of, it had a real emotional kind of punch to me by the end of it all. Like the final chapters kind of just served as a really good reminder of like, oh yeah, like I really care about these core characters, which again, I think when you get to all the big picture future of the world stuff, you know, it's easy to forget that, you know, the starting point of these kind of three crazy smart kids was just like so engaging because you actually really liked those characters in their own way, and kind of going back to that and being like, oh yeah, like this original initial cast of characters is kind of really close to my heart. It did a really good job of pulling back to that at the end to kind of remind you of that. So yeah, like I think, you know, it certainly loses its way a little bit at some point in the series, but like as finishes go, it was really strong for me. And I think, yeah, as a whole, I would absolutely like recommend people read this series from beginning to end, because it is 90 to 95% good stuff.
Yeah, I must admit, hearing you say about reading it all in one chunk is probably a much better way to go, because, you know, if you go back and listen to me carping about it and complaining, then a lot of my problems are the fact that I am kind of consuming it week by week. And like you say, like I really care about the cast, and whenever it focuses on wider world building stuff, it kind of left me cold, because it's a case of, no, you've gotten me so keyed up to this exact problem and this exact thing that needs to be resolved that I really don't care about this wider world you suddenly keep, you know, forwarding. And as you say, like it is nice when like I feel like there's a key point in that series where it reins itself in and goes, okay, now for real is the ending. You knew this was coming, but now we are really ending. And it, as you say, it goes back to beginning. It picks up a load of really important loose ends that, even though they're not the most important in the world state, is really keenly important to you and especially to the cast. And it does some really interesting stuff with that, where, you know, it also, as you say, like there's a political element to the series, but also there's a massive like humanitarian aspect to the manga, which, you know, I feel like it's the sort of thing where it could quite easily discard, and the characters won't let it be discarded, if that makes sense, where there's just a humanitarianism and a humanism at the heart of the series where it really wants to hammer that home to you. And, even when what would supposedly be the most sensible option is to discard it, it must be maintained. So yeah, I think that's, especially hearing you say it, Andy, kind of has helped a few things slot into place in my head. So yeah, maybe I should reread it. I mean, now the entire thing's available and it's all on the Shonen Jump Vault. It could quite easily be read through. And while I would still say there are some elements that kind of get lost in the transfer and along the way, I feel like by the end it kind of has picked itself back up again and like found its best elements to put forward. And yeah, even though I moaned a lot about it, I can still say for sure that I had tears in my eyes by the end because, stuff had happened that was highly affecting and I was so relieved or happy to see them.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think, this isn't something that I'll kind of go back and reread like this year or maybe even next year, but like there's certainly a point where I think, I'd quite like to kind of read through it all en masse and kind of see how it sits a second time around. Like this feels like it's a series that should be interesting to go back through with kind of full knowledge of what's happening and kind of, maybe join up some little clues that were left that were maybe kind of, not clear initially and all that kind of stuff. So I suspect it would actually be quite a fun reread, kind of given a little bit of time and distance. But yeah, I also agree with like the whole kind of humanist element of it. Like it feels like it's a series that manages to walk the tightrope of that kind of Shonen Jump protagonist idealism.
Oh, totally.
There's kind of a trope of those kind of series of just like, we have to save everybody, nobody can die. But like this series kind of walks the walk in a way that makes that work in a way that I think other series don't necessarily. Like there's kind of, like you say, there are so many points where even as a reader, you're kind of like sat there thinking like, why don't you just, and, go down some route where, clearly some people are going to perish and, under the auspices of like, well, some of these are quote unquote bad people, but the series does such a good job of selling you on that ideal and kind of like, even because Emma is kind of a protagonist that has to sell other people on that ideal, I think that's why that works so well. Like, it's not like the rest of the cast is just like, oh, okay, sure. Like, she always has to make that argument and actually make the point of like, hey, we can't just, forego like a whole bunch of people and their futures just for our own kind of whims. And here's why. And like, it's always good at making that argument and actually making the case rather than just being kind of, happy fun time, we should all be friends, which is kind of, like I say, the typical trope of the shonen genre.
Yeah, totally. I think like, I feel like the best thing I can say about this series is that like Emma holds the entire thing together and holds firm throughout the entire series, which is frankly, given what happens to them all, no mean feat. And like the fact that Emma herself stays true to herself and her ideals the entire way through, I feel like even if I was say the writer of this series, I would at some points be cursing myself for having written Emma the way she is, because she's keeping you as the writer honest almost. I don't know. I'm kind of guessing that I'd love to talk to the authors about it if I had the opportunity, but it is very much a thing of like, if Emma ever stopped being Emma, you would know, and it would make the series a lot lesser. But the fact that Emma is Emma, she kind of pulls that entire series and its messages along. And even when she herself is like almost in tears going, I wish I could do this easily, but I want to do it this way, and this is what I believe is the best way to do it. Like that is a very common thing in that series, is like Emma scrunching her face up going, no, you guys, I really want to do it properly. And like, everyone around her is like, okay, Emma, that's why we love you. Oh God. Okay, here we go. But that's what I mean is that the fact that Emma like never she doesn't ever like flip or like break down, or, well, she does as a character, but I mean, it's more the fact that her character as a human like person in this story never once flips off and you go, oh, that's weird. Why is she doing that? Like the fact that Emma is always herself is vitally important to that series. And without her, that series would be a lot lesser.
Yeah, and then I think it's also like the way the other characters bounce off her. It's not just a case of like, okay, we'll do what Emma says. It's like, it is that kind of oh god, she's actually right. Like, you know, as much as there are these easy routes we could take out, like, you know, fundamentally on a kind of a human level, what she is saying is actually the correct course of action, and god, that's going to be really difficult, but I guess, yeah, she's right, we're going to have to do it that way. Like, it's not just kind of a blind following of what she's saying, it's a kind of, it's always that realization of like, yeah, she's actually standing on the moral high ground and not being swayed from that like the rest of us. So I go, yes, okay, I guess we'll do it that way.
Yeah, I feel like her rapport with Ray in particular, because he's around most of the series, is vitally important to that series. Where, yeah, I mean, that you could do an entire I think you could do an entire convention panel about their relationship and about how it's not adversarial, but at times they have to like have it out and talk about things, and like both of them are like chewing their cheek off trying to think about how they're going to talk to the other, and then you know, they are both co-conspirators and friends and family, and like their relationship is like at the start of it is completely wild, and the entire way through it's very much a case of like never once does Ray actually fully get on board with Emma, which is the important thing because he himself has some input on what she wants to accomplish. And yeah, it's a fascinating like pairing those two. So it's especially when at the very, very start you're like, ugh, Ray, and then very quickly it's like, oh no, shit, this trio is vitally important to this series having any cachet whatsoever.
Yeah, and the development of that entire kind of, you know, trio of characters and the way they interact with each other is also incredible. And yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is, again, especially having gone back to it after a breakaway, I'd kind of forgotten how magnificent the artwork is across that series as well. Like, whenever it throws in like a 2-page spread or whatever, it's always just so on point and just looks so good. Like, I absolutely kind of adore the art style of that series as well. So yeah, that's kind of like the icing on the cake of it for me, I think.
Totally. I mean, 2 quick points on that is that towards the end, the artwork also gets hella gory.
Oh yeah.
which also is, it doesn't feel like, you know, like flippant or anything. It feels really intense because, you know, it is like almost like nausea inducingly frightening of like, oh man, this is bad. But also like remembering the author's notes from earlier volumes, like, there apparently are quite a lot of various hints in the art pointing towards the future events, and so when we do come to reread it, if we do find the time somehow, then I'm kind of very keyed in to want to pore over the art and try and like unearth all that stuff. So
yeah, that would definitely be cool. And yeah, like I think as you said when we last talked about the series as well, like also just really excited to see what these authors do next, like because they've set a pretty high bar for themselves, and I'm really hoping they can at least kind of match that with whatever their next work might be. Yeah,
it'd be fascinating. But of course, they deserve a break.
Yeah, I guess we'll let them have a couple of weeks off, you know.
Month maximum. Get back here. Get back in the mines. Okay, cool. So yeah, we got 2 other things here on the list. Do you want to take the point? Which one do you want to do first? Because I've read both of these as well.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess first one I'll mention, which also ties into my actual pick for this episode, is the latest volume of Girl from the Other Side is out, volume 8. And that also continues to be a really, really great series. Like this is a series where every volume I sort of worry that it's going to run out of road because, you know, this is not some kind of series with a sort of massive scope or a huge cast of characters. Like, you know, it is very much about 2 individuals at the end of the day. And of course, there's sort of other stuff going on around them. And every volume it manages to find kind of something fresh to investigate and examine or do with kind of that relatively small cast. And, this volume is no exception. This volume in particular really turns the tables and kind of pulls the focus very much onto kind of Shiva and pulls a lot of responsibility onto her, which is really well played out and really well written. Like, I mean, again, we've talked about various series, on this podcast about like writing kind of child or younger characters in a way that is sort of believable and kind of getting the right tone between kind of like, you know, complete idiot and complete sort of like mature, you know, brainiac, and kind of, you know, finding a voice for a young character that is sort of believable and just the right blend of kind of being smart about some things, naive about others, etc., etc. And I think this volume really manages it with Shiva's character, because she kind of gets put through the ringer a bit in this volume, and kind of the way that she is written and kind of the way she's portrayed throughout is really kind of fascinating and really interesting to read. So yeah, like this continues to be a series that I really love. Like it's still kind of hitting home runs for me, and kind of every volume I find is a page turner. Again, like lots of really good use of artwork. Like it's, Nagabe's use of light and dark continues to be, absolutely on point. And he has they have a great kind of eye for framing things in just the right way to make them really impactful. So yeah, it was another good reading experience for me, but another kind of, another frustration that I've now got to wait however long for the next volume.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. As you say, like Shiva, especially because she kind of takes point quite a lot in this volume, but oh god, it's so... Oh, this volume really rent me a bit, honestly. It was kind of intense, because I really love the cast, and just everything that happens is so intense and so heartbreaking in some ways. And yeah, it really got me, this volume, especially because you've got, as I say, Shiva on point, Shiva driving things, and just so much happens, and just her way of relating to everything, and especially towards the end, like some hints of something have started to happen with the characters. And I don't want to say, I know I'm being extremely vague and annoying, but like everything that happens in this volume is razor sharp and intense. And like, especially when you've been sitting with these characters for 7 volumes and you've been caring intensely about them and pulling for them, like just seeing what is happening now is just kind of really, I'm sorry, I'm failing to find the right words, but yeah. As you say, like the wait for volume 9 is going to be a complete git, but man, am I totally like on several hooks for this, because I really especially now that like things have broadened ever so slightly, which you knew about some of the larger context of things that are happening, and now in this volume you have like the view from the other side, I suppose, which is even more sort of quietly and lightly touched, but also intensely fraught. And so this volume, I read it yesterday and I was kind of blown away by it and going like, damn, this is still, batting 100 sort of thing. I don't know if that's the right phrase. I don't care. But man, I love this series, and I really love this cast, and some of the things that happen are utterly heartrending. So
yes,
at the same time, I'm sorry, Andy, I cut you off, but at the same time, I am super, super glad for those comedic 4-panel manga at the end, because holy cow, I needed that little lift at the end.
Yes, yeah, like that continues to be a delight. But yeah, this is a really intense volume, and I think it's also kind of, it's almost intense in that, like, surely they're not going to do this kind of way, because it's sort of, even though things are set up and like all of the progression of everything that happens in this volume makes sense, it's one of those things where you just kind of, you almost just assume that it's never going to go to quite the direction that it actually chooses to go in. And it's all the better for it, because it puts things in a really fascinating place, and a place that's really kind of open for it to go in any number of directions in volume 9. But yeah, it was definitely like a page turner in the kind of like, oh no kind of sense.
Yeah, totally. And as you say, like the power of framing in the series is just utterly on point, and yeah, it really serves the material well. So yeah, I love this series, and yeah, I can't wait for the next volume. It's really intense.
Yeah. Hopefully sooner rather than later, because yeah, I want to see where it goes.
God, I hope so. Yeah, Jesus. Anyway, so our last returning champion is the next one. It's Dead Demons DeDeDeDe Destruction, Volume 8, which came out semi-recently. I only remembered it when it appeared on this document, so I downloaded it myself approximately, checks notes, 3 hours ago and read it. But Andy, I want to hear what you think about it first. I'm going to be that annoying person who just wants to goose you for takes. I have my thoughts on it, but I definitely want to hear yours first, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a weird one for me, because I enjoyed it as a volume. I enjoyed it as a reading experience, but it's Basically, like because the entire volume is effectively like flashback. It's kind of like going into the backstory and the origin story, if you like, of kind of a couple of the main characters. It sort of felt weirdly detached in a way. Like there's a lot of important stuff that is learned and gleaned from it, but there's also a part of me that couldn't quite escape the kind of wanting to see what's going to happen next in the here and now. Like, given that sort of stakes have very much been sort of raised and you know, kind of written in neon in previous volumes, it's sort of going backwards. It totally makes sense, but there is the kind of like frustrated, like inner child of like, no, I want to see what happens like here and now. So yeah, it's strange. Like I definitely enjoyed it. Like I liked getting to spend time with characters, you know, in sort of in a different setting and in a different time and place, and kind of getting to see what makes them tick and how they ended up where they were at, or where they're kind of at when we sort of, you know, join them in the series kind of from the first volume. But yeah, like there's definitely the other side of me that's just like, I just want to kind of get back to what's actually going on in the here and now, which we really don't get a lot of in this volume.
Yeah, it's super, super weird because you basically have 5 pages of here and now, and then the entire rest of the rest of the volume is flashback or something like that. It also, as you say, it feels detached, both because it's a flashback, but also because it's a mild sidestep. And I'm not going to elaborate on that, but it, as you say, it feels extremely sidesteppy, and it's really bizarre as well because you have a few flashes to the present with a different character, like being like, she's like basically on volume 7, like moved every last piece into the being fully teed up for the Godamarung, almost like the twilight of the gods, the big moment, the Armageddon, the apocalypse, you know, all that. Like it got everyone, and the only character left is the other character, the like button-nosed character who's working with the protesters, who is being roped into some shady ass shit that she doesn't appear to be fully on board with, but is going along with. And she is basically the only piece being slowly moved into final position at this point. But apart from that, the entire thing is a sidestep backstory, and it feels, as you say, it feels extremely strange and detached, especially because it's a really powerful line said by one of the characters early on, saying, "I hope you'll forgive them for this," like talking to someone else who he's sharing the flashback with. Which I don't know, I quite like the framing of the flashback, at least because it allows you to have like the unknowing character and the knowing character to help like show you the greatest of hits of what they need to see. And it does kind of show a few things which are explaining a few holes or bits in the plot that kind of go, oh, okay, you have meshed this back together again now. Like you've managed to knit this like wounded flesh together. But at the same time, as you say, it feels like an entire volume just sidestep from what should be the forward momentum, or at the very least, like tying things together. So It does feel like it's just been the series has been put on ice for an entire volume. And so kind of just got to wait for the next one now. Like it was enjoyable to see the cast, but at the same time, it felt like it took a long time to say or get to what it wanted to show you. Which again, nice to see the characters, but at the same time, it's like, man, this was a long ass ramp up for what you want to tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you say, that the framing of it all is quite smart because, I think it kind of, the whole idea of like, you know, I hope you forgive them for this, brought a real kind of, a very kind of, useful sense of foreboding to everything, because you're kind of watching things play out, being like, oh, okay, this is all fine, but always kind of with that knowledge in the back of your head. And as things start to progress, you can kind of see where things can potentially fall apart, and you kind of start looking for it, and it's kind of slightly kind of agonizing watching that happen, because you can see the characters moving in a certain direction, and it starts to become clear where things are going to go bad and where somebody is going to do something that may be unforgivable. And it does kind of, that sort of sense of impending doom does help to kind of power through what is otherwise, quite a kind of long-winded flashback otherwise. And I think that very much was in its favor, that it has that feeling of, there's always that feeling of dread that you just know that you're never all that far away from somebody doing something disastrous with, you know, something that they maybe have little understanding of.
Yeah, kinda. But also I feel like on the other side of the coin is that it almost feels like the like fireworks factory problem where like you read the entire thing and in the back of your head there's this little voice going, when am I going to get to the fireworks factory? And it turns out right at the end of the volume. And even then and also I think as well, like one of the things I might disagree with you on is I think that the character in question like knows exactly what they are doing, but is in such a weird headspace that they just don't consider it the whole way through. And so when they do pull the trigger, kind of, they could have seen it coming, but they were just not thinking at all. And they were so wrapped up in their own shit that, it's a slip of the mind sort of thing. So I think it's definitely something to be regretted, and they will most likely, I bet, will. But at the same time, it's like, you should have seen that coming, So
that is absolutely fair. Yeah, like it's very much a kind of a subject of somebody being in a weird headspace plus a certain amount of hubris, just kind of coming back to bite them. But it's certainly it's a really interesting development for a series. Like had somebody kind of leaked what happens at the end of this volume out, and as a spoiler, like I would probably have said like, nice try, that doesn't make any sense, I'm not believing that. But like the series has done so much that it's like, okay, yeah, sure, this is kind of intriguing, and I am interested. Assuming that we go back to the present in short order, I'm interested to see how that reframes things and what that means for the series moving forward.
Yeah, given some of the things we learned in basically the previous volume that have still not been fully resolved, like there has to be some kind of like this. The things that we now know have to come back into the main timeline now, like the main plot thread. It all has to kind of come together because things, as I say, things have been set up. Things have been set up to such a degree that like someone needs to push the Jenga tower over. Like there needs to be a push because it's been hanging in the air literally, for like multiple volumes at this point, that something has to happen. So, and remain interested in seeing what the hell that is. So yeah, we'll see.
Indeed.
Cool. So, okay, so that's been our bumper-sized returning champion section. We'll probably have more of this as more stuff keeps coming out and we keep reading more and more manga. Oh dear. Andy, you need to book more holiday, I suppose, so we can get caught up yet more. Cool. So moving on to our main part of the show where we take a look at series we picked at the end of last episode. Do you mind if I take first point, Andy?
No, please do.
So this is kind of a lighter touch than what we've been talking about, all the intense, dread-bearing things. So my first pick was Fuku Fuku Kitten Tales, which is originally, I believe, in 1988. It's a work by Konami Kanata, the creator of Chi Sweet Home. It's published by Kodansha/Vertical, depending on which site you go on. I think it is Vertical. It's complete to only 2 volumes. One thing to note about this is it's really hard to find out information on it because there's a whole heap of different series called Fuku Fuku something, which Konami Kanata made, and so I think this is the first one. And it's another cat manga, as you can tell. You can buy it physically or digitally, as a quick note. And as I say, it's 2 volumes long. We read the first one. So Fuku Fuku Kitten Tales is about a kitten called Fuku Fuku, who, when you first see it, she has Fuku Fuku has an elderly owner who is reminiscing about when she was a kitten. And it then turns into a bunch of small gag strips, not 4-panel, but like sort of just small, slice chapters of just kittens being kittens. Unlike Chi, and Chi Sweet Home, you don't get the whole like baby talk, internal voice of the kitten. You just get the cat making meow noises and the owner being flustered trying to deal with kitten. And as a result, I really, really enjoy it because it's just basically like, as being a cat person myself who is missing his own pair of cats who are being held hostage at his parents, I like cats a great deal, and cat watching is funny, as is watching the people who like cats, because, you know, the whole parasite's brain worm thing gets in you. And yeah, you just get to watch cute kitten tales like, oh, this cat discovered what kotatsu is. Oh, this cat got chucked outside by accident. Whoops. Oh, the cat got lost. You know, stuff like that without the whole like, as I say, the whole like, there's no real ongoing storyline apart from my owner is old, I am a kitten, check it out. And so there's not that many extended casts. There's of course other cats that Fuku Fuku runs into, but it's mostly just this very nice watercolor, chill out, like very early form of Cheese Sweet Home, with a lot less stakes. Honestly, there's not this sort of missing from home element. It's just cute ass kitten in cute ass house with nice owner. And that's kind of it. And it's extremely enjoyable as a result because it's zero stakes, zero intensity, but also adorable cat with dumb cat hijinks. So I'm totally down with it. And if you want something that's really fluffy and light, then this is really up your alley. What did you think about it, Andy?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, I also preferred it to Cheese Sweet Home. Like, I think it's not having any of the kind of, sort of drama, quote unquote, and not having the kind of, inner voice of the cat itself actually sort of really helps. And this sort of reminded me of, as somebody who has been a cat owner and somebody who sort of, knows cat owners, it sort of reminds me of sort of the conversations you have where, like, the first thing that you are asked or you ask that person isn't like, how are you? It's always like, how's the cat? In the hope of getting some kind of like amusing story about what the cat has done. And it felt like kind of a bunch of those conversations kind of stitched together of just like, oh yeah, like I did this and then the kitten did this and it was funny. And, those are the kind of conversations that you live for when you're a cat person, because you will never tire of hearing cat did funny thing anecdotes, and this is kind of just this in manga form, which is pretty much exactly what I wanted it to be.
Totally, yeah. It's extremely, as I say, extremely cute. There's a lot of real dumb stuff because, it's just this great combination of cat owners be silly and cat be silly, which are both correct and accurate and entirely true. And so, yeah, it's, as I say, it's really, really light and fluffy, and you can kind of tell that it's an earlier work, because the art is sometimes a little bit just the exact same setting, but at the same time, it's like, well, it's only a kitten, can't go far. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it as a result because it was just so light and fluffy and enjoyable, as I say. So, yeah, as you say, like, it's really nice to get like the cat tales from someone. Like, I have to get them from my parents at the moment because, again, cats being held hostage. So I have to basically prod my parents to go, hey, what the cat's been up to? Tell me. And so I get that a lot more direct with this manga. But yeah, I'm after going on at length with Returning Champions, I don't really have much more to say about it, quite honestly. If you want to read a cute story about a kitten, then this is totally going to serve you. You can also read it on the Kodansha site as, for a preview chapter. But yeah, it's good. It's not too long. I wonder if the other sort of parts of it would be pulled across and translated. I don't know. But it's just extremely enjoyable for being cat stories. So
yeah, it's simple but effective. Like, it doesn't outstay its welcome. Like, I think, it's kind of form in terms of, chapter length, etc. is always just right. It doesn't kind of, restrict itself too much, but it always knows that when the story is over and there's nothing more amusing to do with the cat in that environment. And so, it's always kind of just on the move to the next thing. And yeah, it just kind of breezes by really easily. I mean, I didn't like time how long I spent reading this, but it felt like a very quick and easy read that kind of, left me satisfied at the end of it all.
Totally. Plus, I mean, cat manga is really easy to write endings for because you just have the cat fall asleep on a pillow.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you're done. You don't have to write like a cliffhanger. It's just, oh, the cat fell asleep. Why are you surprised? So, but yeah, it's really enjoyable. It also makes me lament once more that we don't have Puyo Puyo's observation diary. The anime about the rotund orange cat, which got a very, very quick release from J manga before that collapsed into a pit. So forever, I will always take every opportunity to lament that series' inavailability.
Yeah, it is a shame because it seems like, given the subject matter is a cat, that it would be kind of a slam dunk, and like, maybe not on quite the same level as a Cheese Sweet Home, but I feel like it would very much have an audience and do just fine. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe someday it will be pulled from its J manga purgatory. Yeah,
one thing to know as other cat manga is I found out that Manga Planet are publishing a cat manga by the creator of Wakago Zake. And the first 3 chapters are available to read for free on their site. I haven't yet pulled the trigger on getting a subscription to that service, but I might, because those 3 chapters had me rolling in laughter. So real good cat manga there. So that was good fun. Cool. Yeah, it turns out if your cat's a shithead, you basically have like infinite manga material right there. Cool. So yeah, that's Fuku Fuku Kitten Tales. A very quick hit there, but very enjoyable. So Andy, let's talk about your pick for this episode.
Yeah, so my pick for this show is Love on the Other Side, which is a collection of short stories from Nagabe, who we've just discussed with Girl from the Other Side. So given our glowing discussion of that on several podcasts now, it was kind of a no-brainer to check out this new release. I know there's some other Nagabe stuff about that I've also not read, so maybe someday I'll get around to that. But yeah, so this is, as mentioned, a collection of short stories. There's 6 of them in total, if I recall. And they're all, I mean, if you've read any of Girl from the Other Side, or have kind of heard us waxing lyrical about it, you kind of get a feel for what all of these stories sort of have as their sort of core conceit from that, because they are all very similarly kind of strange kind of mismatches and strange kind of mismatched love stories between kind of individuals that would not normally be thrown together, whether it be a girl and a giant crow or a lion and a young boy. Like, they all have that kind of that core concept in common, which is clearly Nagabe's thing of just like throwing 2 sort of polar opposites together, and usually in particularly strange and kind of surreal circumstances, and then kind of meshing things together from there. And I guess, like, first things first, to like start with the positives, like much like Girl from the Other Side, like I really like Nagabe's art style. Like, again, the paneling and framing of a lot of these stories has really kind of powerful or really smart moments. Like, whether it's having a little moment of comedy, or it's doing something serious, or it's just a big kind of pullback to reveal something. Like, it's always just really kind of impeccably done. And like, I think sort of visually, all of these stories have moments that are just like really good reveals. Like, especially for a series of stories that is kind of about unusual relationships. Like, a fair few of them have moments where it gets to pull back the curtain on perhaps why it's so unusual, or to add an extra layer of kind of oddity to things. And it's always really good at doing that well. In terms of the actual stories, they're kind of variable. I mean, I think the biggest problem that I have across at least some of these stories is that I was kind of, especially when some of these tales start, you kind of hope that the love of the title is going to be, kind of either sort of a platonic or some kind of like familial love. And some of them go into some really weird and uncomfortable places. Like in particular, like the second story is about kind of a wolf man who has kind of, very sort of human sensibilities and behaviors, who is looking after this girl who is apparently like brought up by wolves, who is, basically kind of behaves like an animal. So you kind of, you have the obvious sort of, role reversal there. And throughout that story, like, it feels like a real sort of, parent and child relationship. And then suddenly, like, it starts throwing marriage into the mix, etc., and just gets super kind of icky super quickly. And there are kind of, at least a couple of these stories that have that similar feel, where it's like, this feels like, a good solid sort of friendship or a kind of like family kind of bond, but it always seems to just push it just that one step too far. Like, maybe not in quite as overt a way as the whole like marriage thing in that story, but a few of them just feel like, this is maybe goes a little kind of deeper and more romantic than it actually needed to, and now it just feels a bit weird.
No, I'm really with you on that. A number of the stories, as you say, like the one with the wolf and the one with the lion as well, like it goes from like, oh, okay, there's clearly an empathy and a kinship to be found here, and wait, why are you suddenly making this like very boring and typical and also gross by making it be very like stereotypical romantic love, but also it reminds me vaguely of like this weird I mean, sometimes, especially for that wolf girl one, it reminds me of Bunny Drop in the worst ways, which is really a bad thing to recommend it again or compare it to. Mostly because it's just like, oh, this went from wholesome to intensely creepy and predatory. I am totally not down for this. So I must admit, from that story on, I was kind of detached from the series from the book as a whole, because the first chapter is a kind of cute story about a girl and her giant fuck off crow. Meanwhile, the second chapter is just, oh, this is creepy. And then from the rest of there, it's like, oh, this is not really going to stop or go back to the previous healthy sort of level. It's still creepy, and like it always has to pull things back into this one particular shape of how Nagabe wants the like relationship to end. And it's like, oh, that's kind of just really didn't leave me with anything I wanted to. It really left me cold and detached and not really interested in it, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, that second story kind of really taints the rest. Like, cause I mean, some of those stories, as mentioned, subsequent to that are very overt in their kind of romantic natures. Some of them are a bit more ambivalent, but you kind of can't help but read what you've just seen in that story into them. I mean, the story immediately following kind of has a similar vibe of it. It gets pretty uncomfortable, and like that story kind of works a little bit better because it's supposed to be uncomfortable. Like, basically it's kind of a giant sort of human-sized bird that finds a girl and decides like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna fatten her up and eat her, and then realizes that like he cares about her too much to do that. And like, that one kind of gets away with it because it's supposed to feel uncomfortable from the get-go, but again, like off the back of what you've seen immediately before, it doesn't really help it. And then you kind of get to like, I think what would have been my favorite story is actually like the final one, which is kind of like this blind girl who is basically trying to avoid being eaten by a monster. And there are kind of a couple of smart little kind of twists to that story, which are, they're not kind of complete surprises. You kind of pretty quickly get an idea of kind of what's going on there. But again, by that point, it's like what should have been sort of an intriguing little relationship, sort of, it all feels like it's been soured a little bit by everything that you've read before in the other stories. Like, I almost wish that had been the first up, because then maybe I would have had a lot more love for it than I did by getting to it at the end of that.
Yeah, I must admit, like the rations, the story with the giant bird man, like I feel like it goes back and it spoils its own, like it spoils itself because of the weird like twitch toward the romantic at the end. It's like, you didn't need to do this. Like, you could have just had him like not eat her, and that would have been fine. Whereas, as you say, the final story is kind of the one where I felt like the framing device, or the mold that Nagabe was pushing all these stories into, kind of came through the strongest, because it seemed its way of resolving its like issues with the characters and their interactions is extremely charmed, where it's like, oh, come on, like this is a bit much. Like, you can ratchet down this situation and make it more sensible. But I feel like it crossed so many lines with this story that by the time it finished, I was like, yeah, this is you're kind of blowing smoke up my arse here, because it's just so, just so overt in trying to push everything into a small box that it wanted to fit into. Which is kind of my problem with this volume in general, like, is that, as you say, the art is absolutely gorgeous, but there's just no real hook in any of it, especially, as I say, like once after you've had the second story where it kind of gets away from itself, and it nothing really kind of got its hooks into me, which, is difficult at the best of times when you have only a small amount of pages. But just, man, I was not really on board with this, and kind of like by the end I was very much like, oh, okay, well, I'll talk about this on the podcast, and I've already deleted it from my tablet, so kind of done. Honestly. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of fair. Like, it's sort of a shame, because there are definitely some sort of, nice and interesting ideas in all of these stories to certain extents. But yeah, like they all, I mean, I'd actually be curious as to, what the sort of, what the gestation of these stories are, like whether they were just like short stories that had been written that then got collected under this banner, because it feels like the opposite. Like, it feels like Nagabe was asked to write a bunch of short love stories and then kind of did that, rather than vice versa, and just like, oh, I have these stories that kind of, coalesce around a theme. And I'd actually be curious as to which way around that was, because it definitely, I feel like if only it had used kind of the idea of love much more loosely totally, like, all of these stories would have kind of come out a lot better as a result. And they maybe wouldn't have been kind of zingers and been, you know, stuff that we're praising to high heavens, but I feel like they would at least have been more enjoyable and satisfying, rather than all of them kind of ending with a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. Which, I mean, frankly, like, you know, having read through all of these, like, I try not to think about it, but it does make me worry a little bit about, well, where Girl from the Other Side will ultimately go, because, like, kind of given the sort of the proclivities of all of these stories, it's like, please tell me this isn't going to be like your thing that you sort of shoehorn into everything you do. Like, I hope the Girl from the Other Side isn't going to feel a need to kind of go down a similar path, because that would really kind of wreck what is currently a very good series.
Oh God, you've got me. I didn't even think about that. That's terrifying. Why'd you do this to me, Andy? Jesus.
Yeah, like, that was the first thing that I thought, like, as soon as I sort of got to the end of that second story, of like, I really hope this isn't just, like, always his thing, and that he can actually, like, take a step away from it, because, yeah, I would really, really hate that.
Yeah, same. I would abhor that. But yeah, I feel that this is a different kettle of fish. Like, it kind of, I mean, it's not really that tied into the Girl from the Other Side world. It's kind of just of a, I feel like this is if anything, this is like a book about a sensibility that Nagabe is exploring. I mean, I don't know if it is where, you know, what came first, the anthology or the stories, but, you know, there's a few pages at the end which you can totally write for like an anthology, where it's like, oh, here's all the characters together. Isn't that cute? Yeah. Which, you know, is kind of nice, but yeah, I feel like this is a separate sort of list of a different. I feel like this is a different sort of palette that Nagabe is working from than Girl from the Other Side, especially because Girl from the Other Side has such rich backstory, whereas these short stories, obviously due to their length, are very sort of clipped and like, yep, this is what we got to work with. This is our setting. Let's go. But yeah, as I say, I kind of came away from it extremely cold and not really that interested. So yeah, a bit of a swing and a miss on this one, which, just kind of not really that interested in it, honestly.
Yeah, it is a shame, like, you know, given the Girl from the Other Side, and kind of, you know, as both gushing over it, I felt like I was relatively confident that, you know, especially for a collection of stories, there's kind of usually thinking, you usually get that feeling of like, there's probably going to be at least one banger in this, and like, I mean, honestly, like, I feel like everything in here would have been nice as kind of like ideas that were pitched and then just kind of written by other people. Because, like, I feel like all of the core conceits of these are all kind of like interesting little stories in their own right, but just, yeah, none of them really kind of find anything kind of particularly satisfying and or interesting to do with them. And then, yeah, then they all managed to sour whatever kind of goodwill they did build up by the end of it. But hey ho, I mean, I did enjoy kind of reading through it, mostly just as a visual spectacle, because, as mentioned, like, the artwork is great and really kind of, you know, fits the tone of what these stories are trying to do initially, at least. And again, you know, I could at least sit and have a kind of an appreciation of the artwork and the framing, etc., as mentioned. So I at least felt like I got that out of it, if nothing else.
Yeah. I mean, also the one thing that kind of makes this disappointing is that for each of the stories, when you like the page one setup of how they are, you think, okay, there's an interesting story here. This is an interesting concept and an interesting like pair of characters you've put against each other here. And then when they all roll down the hill in the exact same fashion, that's what kind of makes it upsetting. But like, I feel like left to their own devices, all the ideas here could have like blossomed into their own individual, like, interesting, like, just tales. But due to either length or scope or whatever, they all kind of hem themselves in and become dull by the end, or or actively gross. So that, again, it's kind of one of the things where, like, all the ideas are there and good, but in execution they kind of fall over, which, yeah, it's just kind of, which is where my upset comes from, honestly, because that stuff always drives me nuts, as you know. But yeah, the reason why I keep going on about it is because it is a shame, because, as I say, the art is interesting and the little flicker of an interesting idea in there is what makes it irritating. So, oh well. But yeah, can't all be bangers, as you say.
Yeah, indeed. Like, if you want to see a massive crow eating a sandwich, then, you know, this has you covered. But otherwise, yeah, like, you know, read Girl from the Other Side again instead. Man,
I have like giant crows in my back garden all the time. If I want to see a crow eat a giant crow eat a sandwich, I can do that right now. Like, literally right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, Yeah, I mean, welcome to Scotland, the home of ridiculously huge birds. Like, I've never seen pigeons as big as the pigeons in Glasgow. It's kind of terrifying.
They're so luxurious as well. Like, they look like they've just had a bath or something. It's wild. Like, how are they so? Yeah, how are they so glossy? Is it the pizza crunch or munchie boxes they eat or something? Like,
yeah, maybe there is some girl that is kind of romantically interested in the pigeons.
No, stop. Sorry, Andy, I no, bad. Not having this. Oh dear. But yeah, that's Love on the Other Side. Unless you have anything else to mention, Andy?
No, I think that is it. I might try and check out. I forget the name of the other Nagabe thing that's currently out, which I think is another short story collection. Like I might go with that one as well, and we'll have like a best of 3 at some point. But I'll give it a bit of a rest for now.
Yeah, I feel like at this point, what I mostly want is the outsiders from Girl from the Other Side just doing those 4-panel hijinks again. Like I just want to see those like weirdly mouthed crows getting up to shit and talking in their strange clipped fashion.
I mean, just in general, actually, like Girl from the Other Side, and there are some little slithers in these short stories of just some like really good little bits of comedy. So yeah, I would kind of be up for just like a weird, surreal kind of dark comedy. Because I mean, even like that final story that I mentioned, like the blind girl and the monster, that is kind of like a pitch black comedy in a lot of ways, and it kind of works when it's playing with that toolbox. So I kind of like, this is definitely very much like in the anime sphere, like Kunihiko Ikehara, who keeps doing very serious stuff, but like my favorite things are always just when he does the goofs, and like I'd kind of like to see just some like 4-panel comedy from this author.
Yeah, so I almost feel like I really want like a Statler and Waldorf from the Muppets style manga, where it's just like a pair of characters making awful deadpan mean jokes. Because that'd be pretty funny. But yeah, maybe that's just my particular wish that I want to see in reality. But anyway, yeah, that's Love on the Other Side. That's available physically and digitally now from 7 Seas. You can kind of tell it from a glance because it has the exact same sort of like sensibility of cover as the Girl from the Other Side. So yeah, that's been our topics for this episode. Okay, so moving into what we're talking about next episode on Screentone Club. There's a bit of a theme in this, I guess. I feel like I laid down the gauntlet and Andy picked it up and whacked me on the head with it. So there we are. So my pick is the Yuri comedy, volume 1 of, no, I'm not kidding here. Breasts Are My Favorite Things in the World. Which I've picked because it's got a hilarious title. And Andy, how about you?
Yeah, if ever you want to make an Elliot Page soundboard, you've just been given some like grade A material right there. So yeah, like I mean, ironically, I picked this before seeing your picks. I think it shows where both of our mental states were at, because my choice for the next episode is volume 1 of Uzaki-chan Wants to Hang Out, which even if you don't recognize that series by its name, you will probably recognize it by the artwork or fan art of its titular character, whose chest is, as her shirt will tell you, sugoi dekai.
Yeah, totally. I think it's in volume 3 now, which is kind of what it's also getting an anime adaptation, which is terrifying. But yeah, so I've already read this, so it'd be interesting to talk about it with you. Oh dear. But yeah, that's our picks for next episode. Moving into the final part of the podcast with Closedown. You can find all our previous podcasts at Screentone.club. Also there we have a link to a slightly outdated but soon to be updated page where we list all the series we have covered in the podcast. If you want to find out when and where we covered a particular series, you can also, if you wish, you can rate the podcast, leave a review. That stuff really helps with algorithm, yada, yada. You know the drill. We have a Patreon, as mentioned, patreon.com/Screentone Club. As mentioned, that stuff really helps with deferring the cost of the manga and the web hosting and that malarkey. And also it lets us know you care, which frankly is the most important thing. And you also get to vote on what we cover, which is dangerous, and we shouldn't let people have that ability, should we? But yeah, we have a Twitter at Screentone Club. You can also email us, show@screentone.club. And on the personal side, my name's Elliot Page. You can find me at Elliot Page on Twitter, who just discovered that literally today as we record this was a Formula One race because I completely forgot that I was actually coming back to life. What the hell? And Andy, how about you?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Hannah's1979.
Cool. So, as always, thank you very much for listening and good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.